treason, sedition, rebellion. This is the heritage of the American patriot. Those revolutionaries who stood on principle to fight against tyranny no matter the cost. And that spirit lives strong today in the activists and freedom fighters who fight against the authoritarian state. Each in their own way, each with their own mission, united for the cause.
They had the idea to run on a platform of fuck the police prior to actually winning the primary.
I mean, AOC is a drama queen and she's full of shit.
They said, you don't get to tell us no, we're the state health department, and I said, hell no.
You brought a freaking guillotine.
People already pushing back in ways that didn't even need any votes to be cast.
I'm not ratting on anybody, and I did what I did, so you're going to have to give me what the law says you have to give me.
You want to make the world a better place? Have some babies and raise them to not be stupid.
Hope I don't get canceled talking to you.
These are the people whose stories I'm here to share. I'm Justin O'Donnell, and this is Subversive.
Man, governments are not going to like this shit.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, activists, anarchists, shitposters, and people of the internet, thanks for tuning in for episode 74 of Subversive. As always, I'm your host, Justin O'Donnell. And before we get started, just remember, whatever platform you listen on, whether YouTube Live, Odyssey, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Anchor, or on the air with LRN.FM, you can help grow the show by liking, commenting, subscribing, and most of all, sharing it with your friends. Now, if you enjoy the content, you can head over to join our production team in the insurrection by visiting patreon.com/O'Donnell. Again, that's patreon.com/O'Donnell. And make sure to check out our sponsor, SnexSwag.com, where you can get all your favorite Liberty merch at any time. Brand new designs for t-shirts, hoodies, mugs, dresses, skirts, I don't know, all sorts of stuff. I designed only about half of it, but it's some great stuff. Our sponsors over there at SnexSwag.com make it all available. Official merchandise for this show, several others, and some campaigns you might be interested in. So head on over to SnexSwag.com, where you can wear your principles literally on your sleeves. And if you want to keep in touch between shows, follow me on social media, join our community Discord channel where you can chat with other fans of the show at any time. All these links can be found in the description of the video or podcast you're listening to. So make sure you check them out today. Now, what are we talking about today? We're back from PorkFest. We're in the heat of election season, petition drives going across the country, Libertarian candidates fighting to get on the ballot, get on the debate stage and make their voices heard because it's an even-numbered year. And we're back to throwing ourselves against the wall. With what kind of a goal? With what kind of a mission in mind? Is ballot access so grand that we're willing to sacrifice our mental health every 2 years just to keep trudging forward and treading water in the game of statism at heart? The Republicans and Democrats have it rigged against us. They're never going to give up easily. The courts are appointed by those who win, and we never win. So it's fighting an uphill battle legislatively. So what can we do? How can libertarians move the needle? For those of you who were at PorkFest this week, you saw Karlin Boroshenko, the Libertarian candidate for governor here in New Hampshire, give an impassioned speech about what she believes the most important thing libertarians can do. And that's make Republicans lose. And some of us have done that. I've split the vote. I've caused a Republican to lose, but it wasn't a particularly good Republican. So I didn't have qualms about it. Tonight's guest, someone who's not just made a Republican lose, but handed the balance of the United States Senate to the Democrats as a libertarian, and is aiming to do so again in one of the reddest states in the country, split the vote and cause a Democrat to win and a Republican to lose in the race for governor of Georgia. Shane Hazel, welcome to the show, Shane. How are you today?
Justin, I am I'm just as good as your opening, man. I really appreciate it. God, there's a lot to unpack already, isn't there?
Yeah, it's a real fun thing to think about because, like, how many elections have you run it? I mean, we ran for Senate last time.
This is my third.
This is your third time. Yep. Did you cause someone to lose every time?
Eventually, I guess it depends on how you define it. In the long game, I don't know if I caused them to lose. What I think a better depiction of what I've been able to do is really just expose people to some truths and let them decide from there. It's not so much going out and trying to make them lose as it is to help other people understand that the representatives, quote unquote, that they have are absolutely full of shit, and they take votes 180 degrees from what they talk about on the campaign trail.
Yeah, no, I will say I've had conversations with people. Is right now, this is the first year in a while I'm not running for anything myself. I've run for Senate, I've run for Congress. I've been very active as a Libertarian candidate as long as I've been involved in politics. This is the first time I've ever stepped back from running myself to help run somebody else's campaign and work with another person's campaign. And there was a point where a friend of ours, a Libertarian, who decided he was going to jump into the same race as a Republican and jump into the Republican primary. And somebody asked me, it's like, well, do we care? Like, how does this affect our goals now? I'm like, if it affects our goals in any way, we were in this for the wrong reason to begin with.
Yeah. I mean, 100%. And that's the thing is I think, Libertarians really got to take a look at, what is your goal running for office? Because I think in most states, minus maybe New Hampshire, where you guys actually have a chance and have some real, Libertarians in office. There's just a couple places around the country. Pennsylvania did some really good things this last time around. But in places
well,
like
Pennsylvania tried. They got one of their elected officials removed from office when the state found out she wasn't who they wanted.
Oh yeah, I did see that, and unfortunately, but I think they had like almost 22 people elected to office in Pennsylvania, which I thought was pretty amazing. But here in Georgia and places with really draconian ballot access and rigged elections, the chance of you ever winning is nil, and I mean that. I mean, really, at the end of the day, if they want to corrupt the vote, they just do it. And the thing is the Democrats and the Republicans, especially in places like Georgia, they're all okay with the Democrat or the Republican winning. You got Stacey Abrams or Brian Kemp down here who are both running for governor. If they would rather choose one or the other or the Libertarian for the position, if they would lose, right? And then they would definitely say, oh, definitely the Republican or definitely the Democrat, but not that crazy Libertarian, right? So
right.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, they control everything. So you got to kind of adjust, in some states like Georgia, what your objective is. And I think the objective for most of us is decentralization and nullification, right? And if that's your goal at the end of the day, winning office isn't extremely important. What you're trying to do is basically raise an irate minority, just this 5 to 10% of people that will stand up and say, man, we're not doing this kind of stuff anymore, right? And you build a rebellion at that point. And when you have 10% of the population that's armed and dangerous as hell, that's saying, nah, we're done with this kind of stuff, sheriffs and mayors, you can actually have some a real impact in your local politics.
Now, you mentioned New Hampshire is like one of the few places where we have real libertarians in office here elected. None of them are partisan libertarians elected under the Libertarian Party banner. But what a lot of people don't know is one of the big factors in choosing New Hampshire for the Free State Project back when that decision was being made was the fact that New Hampshire was the only state that had elected libertarians to its state legislature multiple times. Vermont had done it once, Alaska had done it once, Maine had done it once, New Hampshire had done it enough times that you had a whole Wikipedia page to detail all the libertarian state reps over the years in New Hampshire, that it was a regular recurring thing, that there was already that culture of libertarianism here. And since the Free State Project has started its mass migration, a lot of people are running as Republicans. A lot of former Libertarian Party activists who've moved from elsewhere in the country are coming to New Hampshire running and getting elected as Republicans. And the first time I ran for office, somebody said, what if you split the vote? I'm like, good. Then they need to be better. If I'm stealing their votes, it means they didn't earn them.
Mm-hmm.
But here in New Hampshire, like a lot of times we don't feel the need to run against a lot of our state reps because, well, I know that state rep. He's a lifetime member of the Libertarian Party. I've seen him at conventions. He's more principled than the chair of most state Libertarian parties. He just happens to be serving on the House Finance Committee as a Republican.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is the beautiful nuance, and this is. I mean, I get a ton of shit for this kind of stuff, in terms of running and possibly making somebody, like a Republican lose. It would be, I don't know, marginally better than the Democrat, and kind of theoretically too. So maybe take a second to kind of go through a nuance and a criticism, right? Is like. That criticism, I think, maybe holds true in some states, but in other states it doesn't. And the thing is like if you're going out and you've kind of studied the system, you've been part of the system, you're learning the system. I don't care, whatever it is. But the idea that you're going to trash people for going out and trying to make a real difference in the liberty movement, to whatever, peel off votes, inform people, to do the education piece and all the hard work that goes into it, I don't understand it. And that's the thing is, there are some people that claim to be, I don't know, post-libertarians or Mises GOP or something, like they can't stand me down here in Georgia, right? And it's one of the things where they don't understand the inner workings of places like the Republican Party in Georgia. Like, you try to run and the GOP down here, you're going to get shut down in the primary, and then you'll never be on the general ticket. Being able to get to the general ticket is really one of the places that gives you some press, some free press at that, and maybe some access to at least maybe a debate, maybe some polling, and just not the typical blackout that you would get running as a nobody in a primary or something like that. You actually get a chance to actually, I don't want to say do some damage to just the candidates, but you're doing damage to the system down here, because in Georgia, I mean, take a look at 2020. I mean, we're a runoff state. You got to get 50% of the vote plus one vote. And so the chances of, Libertarian getting even into the runoff are slim, because we talked about it earlier.
Georgia's also a lot less like diehard red than people realize.
Well, I think a lot of people in Georgia, I mean, I think I shouldn't say that. I think a lot of people are libertarian that don't understand libertarians. Right.
Like you have Atlanta, which is not a red city by any means. I used to live in Columbus when I lived in Georgia.
Not a red city at all.
Yeah, proud graduate of the Benning School for Boys, but nobody at the Benning School for Boys even votes. It's a very conservative culture and community, but everyone votes absentee where they're from, not where they're living.
Yeah. And then you've got Augusta, you've got Savannah.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got all these centers that are absolutely as blue gets. And then you've got, the leftover blue dog Democrats, which are really the Republicans in Georgia. And I don't think, when people understand that these guys are, Democrats that decided that, probably back in the 60s and 70s, that, hey, we're not going to be able to get elected doing this nonsense anymore. We're going to have to, turn over to the Republican side of things. And, they're like maybe second generation blue dog Democrat Republicans down here. And they're just big state, big spenders, big on, law enforcement and the war on drugs. And I mean, it's really sad. I mean, it'd be comical, but the fact is they use a lot of force and coercion down here in the South to drive home whatever their morality is.
No, I do love the blue dog Democrats, and to me, like, their very existence, and like whenever you get to meet one of them, or especially when you have like a young libertarian activist with like new guy energy, who's new to the movement, who's out wanting to door knock, canvas, and petition, and you start getting into some of the bluer rural areas, and they meet some blue dog Democrats. It's like, I didn't know those people existed. It's like you see, there is no difference between Republicans and Democrats. These guys vote blue no matter who, but they still think Kennedy was a good Democrat. And Kennedy would be a moderate Republican by any means of today's standards, and the Trump party would have tossed him out.
Yeah, minus the fact that I don't know what did he put into NASA, right? At the time, it was just absurd, right? We're going to grow.
Well, no, the Republicans would have loved NASA because it was fighting against the Russians.
Right. And growing the budget in an exorbitant amount, even when we were pegged to the gold standard. I mean, absolutely nuts. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of the lay of the land down here in Georgia anyway, is we've got really, really hard globalist progressive Democrats, and we've got really, really hard like statist Georgia Democrats. And obviously being an alternative to that for a lot of people down here is making at least some waves, and that's what you can expect as a I guess maybe a more prominent libertarian candidate.
Yeah, no, I do know one of our bluest counties here in New Hampshire is our northernmost county. It borders Canada and Vermont, way up there, Coos County. And I was up there a couple summers ago. I was talking to a sheriff's deputy. This is right after we got constitutional carry. And I happened to be out there. There was a bar fight going on between some Canadian bikers and some Maine bikers. And the sheriff's deputy just started yelling at people in French to break it up. I'm like, this is the craziest thing in the world. But I started talking to him, like, so how do you guys feel about constitutional carry passing up here? Because it's like 80% Democrat in this town. He's like, what do you mean? I'm like, we no longer need licenses to carry guns. He's like, what the hell's a license? They just didn't bother paying attention. Like for 30 years, they didn't know they were supposed to be issuing licenses because they just ignored the state. And all the Democrats in the North Country carried guns.
Yeah, I mean, right. I mean, at the end of the day, it's like, John, I really don't care what those guys say down there in the Capitol. We're far out here that the sheriff by his first name. You know where he lives.
Right.
Family, or you may go to church or whatever and see him on a normal basis. Like that's kind of how it is with myself and the sheriff down here. It's like I can call him up and be like, hey man, what the hell are you guys doing? A drug bust at the Walmart that I frequent, and it gets out of control and the guy gets killed, right? Like this is out of control.
Yeah. Now Georgia, I hate to admit this for how long I lived in Georgia, but I never once paid attention to Georgian politics. I never got involved. Like I don't even know what's what or who's who. I just never cared because the whole time I lived in Columbus and voted in Massachusetts. The whole time I lived in Georgia, so it was just never a big non-issue for me, and I never cared. In hindsight, I realized how terrible I was 18. But like, what is the lay of the land with like Georgia's legislature? Because you just assume it's south of the Bible Belt, south of Mason-Dixon. You are heartland country, America. Like it should be red as red can get.
Yeah.
You're North Florida, pretty much.
Like, well, with without the crazy crime that happens in Florida, right? And so the lay of the land here is we have a Republican assembly down here, very heavily in terms of monikers. It is a very red assembly. The problem is they don't do anything. And per example, I mean, we did get constitutional carry this time around, which I think was more of a effort by the state to make sure that Brian Kemp was kept in as the primary. Right, it happened right before. But for the life of me, these guys they're useless. I mean, and in terms of Republicans, you would think in a state that is quote unquote as red as Georgia has been for as long as it's been, you would be kicking 3-letter agencies out. You would be nullifying, all sorts of things from the federal level. You'd be doing decentralization right down to your local level. And that's not the case. And, in 2020, the governor came out like they did in every other place. And they basically said, if you see people congregating and violating the stay-at-home order and the shelter-in-place order, you tell them to disperse or you call us, right? The threat of force and coercion. And the assembly did nothing. We had executive order after executive order after executive order, and the Republican assembly was as quiet as a mouse. There was nothing from any of those guys coming out and saying, hey man, you don't have the executive power to lock down the state. You don't have the executive power to go and close down businesses or put the bureaucracy of the health departments in there. You don't have any of these things. Mask, vaccines with no efficacy that you're pushing, like all these things that you guys are really pushing from the governor's office. Nobody fought it at all from the Republican Party in the assembly. And now there's no kidding, like this effort where Brian Kemp was like, hey, make sure that you guys go ahead and give yourselves a raise. I'll sign the bill. I mean, and I'm telling you, across the state, teachers, everything else, they got a giant pay raise this year. And Brian Kemp obviously made it, one of his main missions in life to sit there and say, hey, listen, state employees, if you elect me and if you go out and campaign for me, and if I'm going to make sure that your salaries are keeping up with this ridiculous inflation. And he's basically, bought the state in terms of the government employees, and I mean across the board. So that's kind of the lay of the land down here, and not to mention his buddy Ralston, the Speaker of the House down here. is one of the biggest criminals in the state. And when I say that, I mean like covered up for pedophiles as a lawyer doing continuances on like little kids, right? Like,
I mean,
that's Georgia.
I mean, at least you guys didn't try and elect Roy Moore.
Don't want to pass him.
But no, I get what you're saying. We had a very similar thing here in New Hampshire with our Republican governor, somebody who promoted himself as a pro-liberty, libertarian-ish, libertarian-leaning governor, which, by the way, it came out, somebody leaked some recordings of private conversations he had where he was bitching and complaining about those damn free staters forcing him to go along with the libertarians, and he couldn't stand that he needed their votes.
Right.
And that got leaked, and it was not a good look for him at all.
Yeah.
But he tried to lock down the state with executive order. He tried to play the petty tyrant to force everybody to follow along and play along. I think it might be a benefit just in the way our legislature is structured. New Hampshire is such a unique legislative body, not just in the country but in the world. Where we have the third largest English-speaking parliamentary body in the world in New Hampshire. Like, only the U.S. Congress and the EU Parliament are bigger. We have 400 state reps for a state of less than 1.5 million people, and they're unpaid. It's a volunteer part-time legislature. They get paid $100 a year to cover their gas traveling to and from. That's it. But all this happening during an election year, we actually saw our Libertarian and Freedom Caucus in the Republican side of the House almost double in size during that election. And to the point where the Libertarians and the Liberty Republicans in the State House now are a controlling majority.
Yeah.
And while they bitched and they moaned, and because the governor wasn't doing them any favors, they fought tooth and nail. And they didn't stop at rescinding his orders. They passed laws and prohibitions against him ever issuing another order similar to it. And I look at people down in Florida, like Republicans across the country, they're heralding like the Republicans who stood up and did something in rural states. And then you have Kristi Noem, the hero, because she just ignored COVID and used taxpayer money to sue herself from stopping marijuana from getting legalized.
Yeah.
And then you have Ron DeSantis, who used the power of his throne to issue executive fiat time and time again and make himself a petty dictator and tyrant that the right just happened to agree with.
Yeah.
And they celebrate him. And I see libertarians celebrate him, post-libertarians, conservatarians.
Oh, yeah.
People who are supposed to be on our side, who understand the dangers of government, celebrating Ron DeSantis. And now that we have a libertarian candidate in Florida, a member of the Mises caucus, nonetheless, running against Ron DeSantis, threatening to split that vote and hurt him, we see people losing their minds, saying it's a bad idea and that libertarians shouldn't run against quote-unquote good Republicans like Ron DeSantis.
Absolute fiction. I mean, and okay, opinions, right? Like we all, they're all opinions. Everybody's got one, and they all stick. We all know the saying, right? And it's like, like, cool guys, go out and show us how to do it better. Like, that's the thing is, if your candidate is running as a Republican, and that's who you're supporting, and you believe in force and coercion, and you think you're still somehow tied to the libertarian name, I got news for you. You're not a libertarian first and foremost. If you're that guy that's, I don't know, post-libertarian or Mises GOP or I don't know, whatever the hell they're calling themselves these days. Like, if you think that Ron DeSantis is a good actor, I got news for you. You were never a libertarian. And if you believe that it's going to take force and coercion from the state, that is absolutely one of the most ridiculous things that I think a libertarian would ever lay his eyes on, because a real libertarian, and I say there's no real true Scotsman, right? Like, but the non-aggression principle, right? From the state, I wholeheartedly agree with a free people that are volunteers standing up against force and coercion. The problem is this is not what is happening in Florida. Not to mention, most of the Republicans in the assemblies around the country did nothing as their governors ran over the entire state that they're in. And then at the same time, they're going to praise DeSantis as this, freedom fighter, or, Kristi Noem as a freedom fighter, or, Brian Kemp down here in Georgia, when in reality, I mean, they're still, like literally just happened maybe a month ago. They're still bragging on Twitter about drug busts. And I'm not talking about like fentanyl, which I don't care, but like just really cannabis that's traveling from one legal state in Michigan down to Florida for people to, buy as medicine and everything else. 300 pounds of it taken out of, somebody's delivery truck. And now it's confiscated by the state of Georgia, and they're bragging about it. Like, that's Kristi Noem, Ron DeSantis, that's, Brian Kemp, and the rest of the assembly members that call themselves Republicans. They're all so full of shit. You can almost.
No, I want to say, like, I don't want to go ahead and say there's no good Republicans. Again, the same thing with no libertarians. There's no good, no Triscosman fallacy there. Like, you have your Nick
Thomas
Freitas.
Massey's pretty good.
Yeah, you have Thomas Massey. You had Justin Amash. You have Nick Freitas in Virginia. You had Eric Breaking in Maine. I can name you 20 or 30 in New Hampshire, but again, that's a pretty unique case because it takes 20 or 30 of them to equal one Nick Freitas in Virginia. But like, they do exist, but Ron DeSantis isn't it. Kristi Noem isn't it. Like,
they were just better than awful. That's it.
Right.
They were better than awful.
They're better than the next best Democrat, maybe. But like, even then, like, you have some Democrats that stand out as okay. Like, you still have like Tulsi Gabbard, who on the issue she runs on and cares about is better than a lot of even so-called libertarians and liberty Republicans.
I agree
on those issues. Now, that's not across the board. Don't get me wrong; she still has a lot of work to do. but
she does.
But one of the things, you're running for governor, and there's no way the Libertarian Party of Georgia is running a full slate up and down the ballot for every office. And I'm sure you have offices that are not assembly office, not legislative offices, that have other roles, other purposes. Are there candidates from other parties that are maybe frustrated enough with their party to have sought an endorsement, work with you, but still running as another party? Have you seen any kind of crossover there in Georgia?
We've got a ton of crossover happening. And to back up a little bit, so the Libertarians in Georgia can only run for statewide offices. And right now we do have a full slate. Yeah, until we get quote unquote 20% of the vote in an election statewide, we cannot be on the ballot for any quote unquote lower offices. So we can't run for assembly. That's
absurd.
Yeah, you got to get just a silly amount of signatures in those places if you wanted to run for Congress. In U.S. Congress, because it's not a statewide race. You can't even run for U.S. Congress as a libertarian in Georgia. So we are restricted, and we do have a full ballot. So the crossover that's happening now, there are no other parties that make ballots. It doesn't happen. Libertarians make the ballot here. And very few times will you have an independent who collects enough signatures to be on the ballot. Outside of that, with the crossover that's happening, we've actually got some pretty big local names that are already coming in from the Republican side that will not be voting for Kemp, and they're throwing their audiences and their weight behind the Libertarian. And in so much as, I'm not going to sit here and tell anybody that, they're full on board with everything Libertarian, right? Because they're not. A lot of what they're going to be doing is a protest vote. They're going to take advantage of the runoff system. They're going to try to send Brian Kemp a message. And at the end of the day, it'll, because Georgia's fixed and rigged, it'll be Brian Kemp versus Stacey Abrams. And I think Brian Kemp may pull it out.
They'll bite their tongue and vote for him over Stacey Abrams after the runoff. You say.
That's right. And then when he loses to Stacey, then I'll get blamed for that. But
again,
and the thing is, it's not just Republicans that are coming over either. We've got a lot of people down here that don't like Stacey Abrams. The fact that she's talking about, funding the cops even more. The fact that she's like, I hate Georgia. It's a worse state to live in. Like, literally quoted, Georgia is the worst state to live in. Like, you're on an election.
Atlanta, maybe.
I don't know where you frequent Georgia, but I've lived here most of my adult life. And
I get Phoenix City is bad, but that's technically Alabama.
Yeah, right. That's closer you get to Alabama. But seriously, there are a lot of people that are, I think, just seeing the system for what it is. and they're like, hey man, what's this guy about over here? Holy crap, he's just talking about all freedom all the time. I might not agree with like that freedom over there to smoke some weed or that freedom over there to carry guns, but damn it, man, he's across the board. He's pretty consistent. He's just like, hey, no, you do whatever the hell you want. Just don't hurt people. Don't take their stuff. So there is a lot of crossover coming. And, you know, I mean, it takes a while to get to this point, right? The third election, you run a podcast, you do, you know, some national stuff in terms of like causing runoffs, and everybody's all the time, whether it's Democrats or it doesn't matter, right? Like all these people are really just to the point where I think they're seeing through this facade. And when you've got some answers and you put some thought in between things, it goes, you know, really, really well.
Yeah, no, I just asked because we had a crazy circumstance actually here in New Hampshire. Back when I first ran for Congress, I made the crazy mistake of endorsing a Democrat for a county office. And it was Libertarians and Free Staters and Liberty Republicans who lost their minds. They're like, how could you dare? I'm like, listen, we spend every day we're campaigning trying to get people from the other parties to vote for us, trying to get people, candidates and officials from the other party to see how bad their party is and support us with what we're doing. Like, how can we honestly sit here and just imagine that none of them are close enough to coming over that they're worth our support in what they're doing?
Yeah.
And we had a candidate, she was running for register of probate in my county, in Hillsborough County, that I lived in. I was running for U.S. Congress, and she started showing up to my events and come and talk to us because she wanted advice on whether or not she thought we thought Libertarians would start to support her, because her entire platform, and mind you, she was a socialist. She was a self-identified anarchist socialist. She hung out with Vermin Supreme. He's the one who introduced her to us, but she was running on a platform of abolishing the office of register of probate. I'm like, she's running on a more libertarian platform than I am, and I'm running for U.S. Congress. Like, how could I not endorse her? Like,
right.
And people lost their minds. I'm like, no, like, this is how we build these bridges and coalitions. Sure enough, she got elected, and she submitted the bills and constitutional amendments to get the office rejected. It took her 4 years. It's going to be on the ballot this fall.
Wow. I mean, and the thing is, there you go. You got an issue, right? You like, we that's the beautiful thing about what libertarians can do. You know, you find issues, you go after an issue with somebody that's maybe not a full-fledged anarchist or barely new to libertarianism, or a Liberty Republican or a sane Democrat, right? And you're just like, hey man, let's knock this thing off of the books. Let's get people you know, whatever right or money or whatever we can do to free these people. And I mean, find an issue and go.
One of my best friends in the state house here in New Hampshire, I go and work with her all the time on her bills. She is a tried and true progressive Democrat. She's not even in the Liberty caucus. She's not a Republican. She's not remotely a libertarian. But the issues that matter to me at the moment are the ones I want to dedicate my resources and time fighting for, are the ones that need the help. Because let's face it, in 400 state reps, when 150 libertarians are headway focused on medical freedom, they don't really need me. And all I'm going to do is not a state rep is get in their way. Right. So like an issue I care about is decriminalizing psychedelics and psychedelic therapy for veterans, and like PTSD treatment options here in the state of New Hampshire. And it's the Democrats pushing those bills.
Yeah.
And none of the libertarians will listen to them because they're Democrats. So why can't I go help build that bridge and make that happen for them? And in turn,
100% a beautiful thing to do too. I mean, what a better cause.
She's the one submitting the bills to ease ballot access and make ballot access easier for third parties here in New Hampshire.
It's crazy. And that's where a lot of Republicans are coming from in this election, is to open up the election so we have ballot access as libertarians and other third, fourth, fifth parties. It blows my mind that where you will find some of these people that you can work with on whatever issue it is. And that's the beautiful thing about being libertarian is, hey man, find an issue and get to work. Like, I mean, all the talk and everything else is cheap.
Now, you actually get a lot of credit for giving the Democrats the Senate, for causing the runoff, causing the Republicans to lose in that election. I look at it as like the runoff is more responsible itself, because the runoff system allows people to cast a protest vote for you without it really biting them until after the runoff. Like it's a market signal almost. By the very fact there is a runoff, somebody can cast a protest vote to send a market signal to that Republican candidate that says, you fucked up, you better earn this by the time it comes back. And give them an opportunity to earn it back. And they just didn't earn it back. They had the opportunity. The fact that your votes then went to a Democrat should say more about the Republican than it does about you. If they fail to earn it.
Yeah, far more. And you know, in that specific case too, it's like, guys, you know, to give credit where it's due is, you know, we put the invitation out and I had an hour-long conversation with Senator David Perdue at the time off camera and said, hey man, here's my laundry list of issues that you can take up and present to 115,000 libertarian voters. You know, pick one, give it to them. Just, man, raw meat, come on the show for an hour and let's have that conversation. And so what they did was they sent in Rand Paul to have that conversation, and Rand Paul couldn't give me one damn reason to vote for David Perdue other than if they had a majority in the Senate, then Rand Paul would have a larger voice. And I was just like, that's not a reason to vote for this guy, man. And I hated doing it, like to rip apart Ron Paul's son, man. Like I didn't, you know, I wasn't.
There's the apple fell pretty far from the tree. It's still better than the crab apple bullshit growing in the orchard, but
it is.
It fell pretty far from the tree.
Yeah, at that point, you know, David Perdue said, hey, I'm not coming on your show. And when that happened, I let out the text that he sent to me, and everybody was like, oh, fuck this guy, man. Like, this guy's a piece of shit. He can't even take, you know, an hour of his time and give the Libertarians one issue. Like, I mean, not even a campaign. You guys aren't worth a campaign promise, is what he told the Libertarians. And you know what, man? I mean, not only that, but the Republicans didn't show up for him either. And the Democrats at that point, you know, they went in. And, you know, I don't know, looking back at what this 4 years is going to be, maybe a good thing they didn't have their fingerprints on it, if you know what I mean. You know?
Right. Yeah,
So,
a little bit of saving grace for some of the individuals involved.
Yeah.
But like, I ask because if you can't run down ballot, if you can't run for assembly as a Libertarian, what's stopping Libertarian Party of Georgia members and Libertarians in Georgia from registering Republican or Democrat, whatever's better in their district, and running for those assembly seats undercover and causing a scene in the assembly once they get there?
Well, you would have to fake it for a long time. That's the one thing down here is it's a get in line state. Whether they're Democrat or Republican, the GOP and the DNC are entrenched from your most basic local level all the way up to DC. And if you don't look right, smell right, you are not in the club, you know, where you get down on the ground and kiss the ring, right? You're not going to make it. And so I guess it kind of brings up the question, you know, is okay, let's say you fake the funk, because I started out in the GOP and I thought I was going to turn things around for those guys. I was like,
sure,
man, this guy, you know, hometown boy, hometown hero, all that kind of stuff, veteran, you know, red, white, and blue, and talking liberty, and just hell no, that wasn't happening with the local GOP, right? Local GOP told the region GOP, told the national GOP, and they shut that down fast, right? So that's why people don't invade the parties down here and then get into the assembly, because it's such a well-oiled, you know, backwoods, good old boy type of system, both Democrat and Republican down here, that, you know, I think probably love each other to the death, and you know, behind the scenes, just like they do.
Right.
That's why they don't do it.
So it's almost like there's this really either or situation in every state, where it's either the parties are too organized to successfully infiltrate, or like here in New Hampshire, where they're so disorganized, once you infiltrate it, there's no need sabotaging it because you just took it over. Like, here's a funny story about how easy it was to influence the New Hampshire GOP, and how easy it was to, we had maybe 20-25 Libertarians in the state house at this point in time. They were by no means a majority. They were a vocal minority, but everyone knew who they were. They didn't have any power. Got a few bills passed here and there, and influenced anything that was like swing and tie, where they could form a coalition with the Democrats. Chris Sununu was out one day, and he was announcing his bid for re-election, And me and a couple friends just went to his rally with cameras and doing like man on the street stuff and just trolling people. And we brought some signs, and we had one big giant sign that said taxation is theft. And we found the tallest one of us, kid Richard Manzo, who was about 6'1.5", and we're like, go stand on the steps of the step house behind the governor and just hold this up. We did not know that the governor was filming a commercial that day and using the speech as part of his announcement video for the campaign. And they could not get an angle of any of the cameras to cut out the sign. So they went with it, and they aired it on TV, where the governor of New Hampshire announced his re-election in front of a giant sign that read "Taxation is theft."
Oh man, right time, right place.
2 days later, the Democrats are blowing up on Twitter. The governor doesn't believe taxes are necessary. He believes taxes are theft. The New Hampshire GOP has turned anarchist. The New Hampshire GOP dove in and started printing a bunch of taxation is theft merchandise. And that became the state GOP's official slogan for the election.
Oh, perfect, man.
And it's crazy because I look at, there was a lot of controversy in the last year and a half, 2 years over LPNH, and LPNH doing what LPNH does with social media and local branding, and Libertarian parties in other states throwing a fit about the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire making us all look crazy and radical. I'm like, how else are we supposed to set ourselves apart when our Republicans are more libertarian than most state libertarian parties?
Right.
Like we have to set ourselves apart somehow. The one big thing, the crazy thing that everyone got all upset was when the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire tweeted abolish public schools. Like, just screw it, kids will learn more on the job site than they would in school.
I remember
Gary Johnson responded saying this isn't a libertarian take. Guess what the New Hampshire GOP responded by doing? They opened up school choice and eliminated all the rules preventing kids from getting jobs during the school day.
That is perfect. It perfectly illustrates the nuance from state to state.
Right. So, you look at places like, I wish New Hampshire got better attention for these things on the national stage more than just once every 4 years. The only time anybody actually pays attention to the nuance of New Hampshire is seeing who filed first on the in January on a fourth year.
Here's the deal, man. It's like when you do this liberty stuff and when you live it, and when it is the course of life and news and everything else, the people that run media are absolutely allergic to this kind of stuff, and you know, and I mean, like, they will not cover you because their affiliate programs and everything else, all the money comes from the top, right? And we all know economics. When you talk about who the state and the money being in bed together, you know who is going to get paid and is going to get paid those big bucks. And if you stray from that, man, you're fired, or your organization is out. And so, yeah, New Hampshire, man, I feel for you. They treat you guys as a state like they do us as candidates, as, you know, libertarians down here. It is, you know, the mushroom effect, right? It's just put these guys in the dark, whether it's polls or debates or you media, you name it, man. That you are absolutely going to be blacked out, so nobody can see, you know, what you're talking about, because these ideas, man, they tend to spread real fast and real cheap.
Well, at the same time, like, you have, like, people don't realize how much influence libertarians have on the GOP here in the state of New Hampshire. And a lot of it's from spoiling their elections when we run as libertarians, from straight up beating them in primaries when we run as Republicans, in creating enough public noise and enough public outrage over minor particular issues that we forced them to come to our side to get the votes back. Because we run every time. Like, I ran a radical anarchist, abolish the state, abolish public schools, abolish every federal department, and return every dime of your taxes back to New Hampshire taxpayers campaign for U.S. Senate. I got twice as many votes as Joe Jorgensen did in the same district.
Yeah, man, that's same here.
Yeah, like, so, like, and it's not even that. Like, Darryl Perry ran a campaign as the compassionate, moderate, reasonable choice for governor. I got almost 3 times as many votes as he got for governor in the same district.
I'm telling you, man, this radical type of anarchist message, and you know, I know people are scared of the word anarchy, volunteerist maybe, type of messaging. You know,
Here's the thing: the people I'm appealing to, and the people you're appealing to, the people that the radical libertarians are appealing to, the people like, let's face it, the Mises Caucus takeover kind of appeals to come into the Libertarian Party are the libertarians who didn't believe in the Libertarian Party. How in the hell can we convince normal people who don't share our values to vote for us if we can't convince people who share our values to help us?
Yeah, right. I mean, beautifully put. Because that's the thing is, man, being a libertarian at the national level, like, oh, it was gross. I mean, I remember it was like 2015 when I joined the Libertarian Party, and then I think it was 2016 when we fielded Gary Johnson again, and I was like, what the fuck? And I think I got some stupid ass email back from Nick Sarwark, and maybe not stupid, but he said, hey, you don't fucking like it, show up. And I was like, okay, all right,
bet.
Well,
how do the words taste, Nick? Because you've been saying them for 6 years and they finally came up. Like,
oh man, that's gotta be really bad. I mean, he inspired a lot of people to just get busy, get down, get work.
I did 2 terms on the LNC. I was the Region 8 representative for New England, New York, and New Jersey. During those 4 years, I had a fantastic, phenomenal working relationship with Nick Sarwark. He was one of the most competent board chairs I've ever worked with. He knew what he was doing. He could manage the organization exceptionally well. He handled donor relations incredibly well. And then, like, towards the end of that second term, he moved from Arizona to Manchester, New Hampshire. And now I have to see his car out my window every single day. He literally lives 2 doors down.
Is that in Ohio?
And it was something about when he moved to New Hampshire, his entire personality changed, his demeanor changed, how he treated other people and acted and worked with other people changed entirely. And in fact, what a lot of people don't know is, like, when Josh Smith first ran for chair, Nick told him to run for at-large, and Nick supported him for at-large and said, maybe I'll support you for vice chair next time.
Yeah.
It wasn't he's a Nazi, he's horrible, he's destroying the party. It was he wasn't experienced and needed to learn a bit before he took that step.
Right.
Nick understood the future of the party was in grooming our bench back then, not in driving people away. But he moved to New Hampshire, and my running theory is the Libertarians are so successful here in New Hampshire that nobody gives a shit who the national chair is.
That's the way it should be too, is like, oh, we're doing stuff up here that you guys haven't even thought of down there, right?
And I look at this like he's not the first instance. Like when Vin Armani moved to New Hampshire, and then he very quickly left because people didn't roll out a red carpet for him. Everyone's like, cool, what are you doing? Who are you supporting? What are you running for? Who campaign are you volunteering for? He's like, I'm doing my podcast. Like, oh, bye.
See you later.
Like, it's like the Celebritarians don't last here in New Hampshire. We've had a handful of Celebritarians move for the Free State Project, find out they're not going to be treated like celebrities because everyone here expects them to do the work, and then just leave to go elsewhere. And it reminds me, like, when I first met Nick, and when Nick first ran for chair, he said he was running to be the least important person in the Libertarian Party. And the moment people started treating him like the least important person in the party, he had a breakdown and sabotaged everything around him.
Weird, huh?
Yeah,
I mean, it is such I don't know, a phenomenon. I don't know what you call it, but I mean, that's the thing is, like, man, if you're one of those guys and you want to move to New Hampshire, you got to be ready to either get to work or retire, right? Like, and I don't know, that sounds pretty damn good. Is like, I mean, I'm looking at 2022 as kind of the final run for at least the time my kids are around, for God's sakes. And it's just like, man, like, now I'm done for a while, at least with this kind of stuff. But like, if you move to an area like New Hampshire and you're not ready to either put up or shut up, it's like, man, you're not going to kind of be lukewarm around here, and nobody gives a damn about celebrity status. Like, I mean,
right. A lot of libertarians have had a real bad taste for the Libertarian Party. Like you mentioned, Gary Johnson, 2016. I used to joke that if Gary Johnson 2012 was the candidate in 2016, he might have actually won the election. Because Gary Johnson in 2012 was like sharp, direct. Like, he was an asshole in debates. He called Ron Paul out in debates on stuff Ron Paul wasn't firm on. It was like he was a different guy and a different candidate altogether, but didn't have the infrastructure around him.
Well, I think a lot of that too, and here's the thing is, once you start down this path too, and caution to those people that are thinking that just because you're growing and taking in, like you said, the Republicans and Democrats, once you start doing this, the Republican and Democrat interest groups are also coming to you, and they want you to vote a certain way. They want you to take up an issue. And I'm going to tell you right now, you better make it very clear to people, like Gary Johnson didn't do, is you can vote for me or you don't have to vote for me, but we're not changing a damn thing in terms of our platform or principles. Man, like that kind of stuff is something you have to be super rock solid on, because that's where people get lost, man. And I think that's where Gary got lost.
Here's something that maybe a little bit of a credit to Gary. And this is a funny story. I want to end with this and then get your perspective on something similar here. But I've published a story. I've talked about it a lot, how I ended up like leaving the military over my experience with the 4th of July and marathon bombings in Boston, and being the NCOIC of a security detachment that held the city of Boston hostage for a week. Having a realization after the fact that I was the bad guy, kind of like, I'm done, walked off. But it wasn't, it was the seeds of like, when I looked back on it, I voted for Gary Johnson as the Libertarian candidate in 2012, even though I was a registered Republican. I was in the Army, and I can remember the day I decided to vote for him. It was during the GOP primary, when he was still in the primary, and he was debating Ron Paul. People don't remember that the 2012 GOP election debate, there was like 15 candidates, and the only ones that got to speak at all were Ron Paul and Gary Johnson, because they monopolized an entire debate just fighting with each other over heroin and marijuana. And they started yelling at each other about whether or not to legalize heroin, Ron Paul says, or just marijuana, like Gary Johnson says. And everyone else on stage is like, you're both crazy. You guys should shut up. And I'm like, and at the time I was thinking, well, Gary Johnson's the reasonable one here. And I had experience working with Mitt Romney in Massachusetts, so I refused to support him. So I ended up voting for Gary Johnson. 2 years later, after I was out of the Army, I joined the Libertarian Party, and it was really Gary Johnson that brought me to the Libertarian Party. A good friend of mine, Andrew Olding from Ohio, he tells a funny story about Gary Johnson's also the reason he joined the Libertarian Party. But he joined the Libertarian Party to make sure nobody like Gary Johnson could ever represent libertarians again. Like, he was upset enough by Gary's representation of libertarianism in 2016 that it drove him to join the party to make sure he would have a say in who the next candidate was.
That's too funny, man. Gary didn't either make or break me. He definitely was one of those guys that was like, oh, we can do so much better if we.
I just remember sitting in 2012, like Ron Paul's talking about legalized drugs, legalized heroin. I'm like, this guy's fucking crazy. And then Gary Johnson's like, we'll start with marijuana. I'm like, that's a reasonable take. Here I am 10 years later saying Ron Paul didn't go far enough. We need to legalize marijuana and start jailing pharmacists. But
it's absolutely 100%. Yes,
yeah.
I'm down 100% on that one.
Well, that's the difference between a libertarian and an anarchist: 6 months to a year.
I was going to say the reading of some Austrian economy or whatever it is that finally pushes you over there. It's time and education is all it is, man.
It's exposure to people like Karen Ann Harlos, and Mike Seebeck. Once you start, I was on the platform committee with Karen Ann Harlos and Mike Seebeck one year, and that just, I never came out of that the same way. But
yeah, I mean, they make you sit there and you go, oh man, boy, my thought process on this is fairly archaic, and it's I've got a cognitive dissonance in it, and it's just like, holy shit.
We had like a 5.5 hour platform committee meeting that you're debating a children's rights plank. And it ended up like somebody from Alaska and California arguing, screaming over, we need a children's rights plank. He's like, now you're the state demanding we protect children for their. We're like, I'm like, at what point do we? And like, it ended up like the 20-person platform committee got into a 5.5 hour argument about where we drew the line in protecting children from their parents or from the state. Like,
that's awesome, bro.
Like, but I'm like, I came away from that meeting. I'm like, it's a little bit more nuanced than I thought I was getting into.
That's why I don't like business day, man. I can't do it.
What was it that brought you? Like, what possessed you to first run for office? And like, you're at the point where you've had a significant enough impact where like people across the country know your name. You have a pseudo celebrity status now. You are quote unquote influencer within our sphere. But like, what was the spark that got you to make that jump?
Man, thinking back on it, it was about 2016, and I started contacting my representative, and I forgot what issue was over. At the time, I think I was more of a federalist than an anti-federalist, or somebody that found Lysander Spooner. I definitely hadn't read, the great Austrians, Mises, or Rothbard, or Hayek, or Hoppe, like none of that stuff yet. And so, I was really kind of still, like, oh, we could make this constitutional republic work, right? And my representative was such a piece of trash at the time. He wouldn't respond to me, or when he did respond, he was just really this car salesman and
a politician.
I mean, at the time I had 3 kids that were like, I don't know, 3, 4, and 6. And it was, in me, I was like, I got to do something. I can't sit here and bitch and moan and complain. In terms of resumes, I know the Constitution cold like an autist. So like I can tell you, any and every part of it. I can tell you why they did what they did, and I can probably go through a fairly large amount of history. I've got, all these ridiculous awards from the military, special operations, veteran, combat, all this stuff, and hometown kid on top of it. It was just like, let's go. Like, get your shit and let's go. And I mean, you first run out of the bat, I think I got about 30% of the vote, but that's really why I did it. And fun story is I had a fun debate with a guy and kicked his ass in front of the county that I was from at the time. But after the election was over, I called him up, wished him a Merry Christmas. I said, Rob, congratulations, man. I got to tell you right now, if your voting record doesn't improve about 50%, because at the time, I guess he was voting as a 50% constitutional voter as a Republican. I was super pissed about that. And I said, if you don't get up to about Thomas Massey's level in this next Congress, I will make sure that whoever you run against, you're done. And a month later, he announced his resignation after that term, because he knew he couldn't get the votes, and he knew I was serious as shit. So that was originally why I ran. But I mean, the inspiration between coming over and really just getting in love with liberty was the speech that Ron Paul gave about blowback in 2008, man. And that guy and the quote unquote the crazy guy in the big suit that was old, talking about CIA blowback, and I was like, whoa, man, this guy knows a lot of what I've seen firsthand, and he speaks the truth. And I was just like, oh man,
and honestly, that's one of the reasons I think we really need to start being more accepting of some of these. Like, there's a lot of old school politicians who thought they were doing right, and I always try and tell people we need to, like, when we engage with a lot of people, you need to assume they're working in what they think is best interest. Like, nobody's acting maliciously in their own mind. And right. I remember everyone was really upset with Lincoln Chafee when he came around and started getting involved in the Libertarian Party. He didn't plan to run for president. Somebody talked him into that and dragged him along and used him as a puppet for a scheme. But like, I remember he came to an event in New Hampshire to visit New Hampshire, and he came to not even a Libertarian Party, just a Free State Project event to meet with people. And he's just talking to people, wasn't giving a talk, just chatting over dinner, and just starts bumbling into a story about this one time when he was on the Senate Armed Forces and Intelligence Committee. And
the way they passed the 9/11 resolution, right?
And he was super annoyed with the CIA representative during testimony. And so after the day, he just walked over to the CIA, and like they locked him in a room and refused to answer him, and like kept bringing him room to room to room, and then eventually just left him outside and locked him out of the door. And he's like, I'm a fucking senior U.S. senator who's supposed to be voting on this, and they're just treating me like garbage. I had all the security clearances and everything. They just refused to give me anything. And they refused to tell me what they were doing.
Yeah, I 100% to your point. I think you are when you say people need to be slow with people who are becoming libertarians.
Right.
fun story, right? Is
Yeah.
Justin Amash, was a Republican that became a Libertarian, and it was new to Libertarianism even as of last year at the Michigan.
He was already further along as a Republican than a lot of new Republicans we get in.
Yeah,
but
he wasn't. He wasn't. We are anarchists, right? And so I had this discussion with him in front of Larry Sharp and Spike Cohen about the War Powers Resolution and the AUMF, right? Where I was really, I was being a dick and beating him up a little bit, and I really didn't realize it because I was like, man, this is Justin Amash, right? And like, Justin's great. Don't get me wrong. Like, Justin is a great guy. He's going to do some really, really good things here in the Libertarian Party. But it wasn't until the next morning when Larry came over to me, another Marine, and was like, hey, dude. He's that new Libertarian that I was talking about in my speech. If you were listening to it. Oh man. And I was like, last night when it dawned on me after this all went down, I was like, I knew exactly what you were talking about. And I felt bad, right? It's like, hey man, give people that breadth when they come in or they're thinking about coming in. You have no idea where they're coming from. Most of us were indoctrinated by a government indoctrination system. And it's like, at the end of the day, you just got to give people some room to move a little bit and kid gloves a little bit.
I think that it might be a unique perspective that like I have this discussion with Adam Kakesh, and it's just we both understand it implicitly, and the way we approach people is always assuming everyone's acting with the best intentions and guiding them along. But some of the more autistic libertarians, people who just read their way to freedom rather than working their way to freedom, just can't understand why everyone hasn't come to the same conclusions as them already. And I think it's the perspective of people like, if you've been through the Benning School for Boys, you've been through Paris Island, you've been through you've been through the military in the United States. There's something I think a lot of people don't realize is if you've become a libertarian after that, you've escaped brainwashing, and you innately know what the brainwashing is, and you know what other people are going through to come to that conclusion. And I think a lot of libertarians struggle with realizing is that your average American has gone through just as much brainwashing as we did in 6 weeks of basic training in 18 years in front of a television set.
Amen, Justin. Holy cow. Yeah, 100%.
All right. Hey, well, thank you so much for coming on. This was a blast. It was a pleasure of a conversation. Everybody, give Shane a follow on Twitter. Check out his website. He is running for governor in Georgia, state I hope to never move back to, never go back to, no offense, but people can say New Hampshire's too cold for them, and the summers in Georgia and red clay stains in my laundry I can never get rid of. I'll never miss. But Shane, where can everybody give you a follow? Where can everybody check you out?
Shane T. Hazel on Twitter and ShaneHazel.com or RadicalPod.com. You can check out anything and everything that's there. Justin, man, great hanging with you and getting to chat a little bit. I'll have to have you on Radical, and we can introduce. We can really scare the shit out of Georgians with what's coming from there.
All right. Hey, well, until next time, everybody, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for watching. And until next time, be free. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Subversive. Make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to get alerted every time we go live on YouTube. And make sure to leave some comments and reviews on whatever platform you listen on to let me know what you thought of this episode. And a huge thanks and shout out to our sponsors and the awesome members of the Insurgency on Patreon. If you enjoyed this content, you can join the Insurgency on Patreon by following the links in the description for patreon.com/O'Donnell. And if you can't catch the show live, you can always catch it the next day on YouTube, Odyssey, Anchor, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Breaker, CastBox, and wherever else you listen to your favorite podcasts every day. So until next time, everybody, be free.